Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for the start of the conference proper in terms of contributed content. First up, I'd like to welcome to the stage Samuel Spencer, Library Innovation Manager at the Parliamentary Library, talking about digitising democracy. Thank you very much, Sam.
Good morning. Is that on? That sounds on. Okay, cool. Good morning. My name is Samuel Spencer and I am from the Parliamentary Library. That's my office. And I work there. It's actually a really nice place. It's an amazing place to work, actually. And for those of you who aren't aware, the Parliamentary Library provides impartial information services to members and senators throughout the year, no matter where they are. So whenever a parliamentarian has a question about digital rights management, windmills, the census, they ask us. They come to us and they get a lot of information. But one of the other things that we do is every time there's a change of parliament, which happened recently, we publish the Parliamentary Handbook. And this is an ongoing omnibus that's been published for the last 100 years that details the biographies, the lives and the political statistics of Australia's history. It's an amazingly large, rich data set that's just insanely cool. It is. It really is. And I didn't believe that until quite recently. I'm a programmer. I'm not a historian. But now I'm a historian as well. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fascinating. And when I first started a year ago, they said, we want to build an app. Like, we want to make a parliamentary history app. I said, great, where's the data? They said, there. Ooh, okay. Well, that's not actually true. It looked more like that, which wasn't much better, but it was a start. So we had a whole bunch of Excel spreadsheets, which I don't know about you, I actually love Excel. Because people get it, people use it, they can put information in there, and at least it's structured. Like, you can do stuff with Excel, and that's a big part of what I want to talk to you about today. Is like, how the hell do you manage this information? And we started, like, I'm a Python developer, and I said, well, I think we can do this in Django, and there was a lot of convincing and a lot of going back and forth, and we started having to kind of figure out how do you describe this? Like, nobody's ever sat down before and said, what is the ontology? What is the data model behind politics? Like, we couldn't actually find one. The closest we got was a standard called Popolo. And Popolo is quite big in the open civic community and the open data community, where civic journalists and engaged citizens will try and describe what they think was going on inside of Parliament. It had never been done the other way, where we as an official organisation said, this is what we do, this is how we do it. And it's a small data model that really looks at people, positions and memberships in those positions. And as soon as we started to dig around the surface, it started to get a lot bigger. So organisations are parties, they're political chambers, they're ministries, they're these really interesting things. Posts, like a position that somebody held was, like, they were elected to service, they were in a ministry. We have a real issue with ministries, like they're about 4 different things, so we have very long names for them now. And there were appointments, so you were the speaker, you were a representative, you were a high commissioner and all these things. And we started to dig into it and we came to the realisation that it was actually really difficult to manage. And we went through many, many iterations of writing models.py. So this is one of the only forums where I can say we had to write models.py about 20 times. And being a lazy developer, we were asked quite frequently to describe what our model was, what our data model was. And being the lazy developer that I am, instead of spending 5 minutes updating a Visio diagram, I spent about 2 weeks building spaghetti and meatballs. So has anybody here seen spaghetti and meatballs? Oh, wow. That's so rad. This was like 2 weeks of work and it was so cool. Like, it was so friggin' amazing to do. I loved it. It's so cool. So if you've used spaghetti and meatballs, you know what it is. But for those of you who don't, Django is really great at building your databases. It's great at building your admin interfaces. And I was like, no, I needed to do a little bit more. I actually needed to describe, to build the UML diagrams for me. And I say UML, but I put it in brackets because I hate UML and it's like, you know, but it comes really close. Like, it does a really good job of actually describing it. And this was one of the big pieces that people loved because they said, what's in there? And I'm like, well, this is in there. And it meant we could start building everything from models.py. We said, we've got the documentation, we've got the interfaces, we've got the databases, we've got the modeling diagrams, all from one place. So nothing ever got out of sync. As long as the code was managed, everything else was good to go. So just as a quick aside, spaghetti and meatballs, if you're a Django developer, basically it takes all of the attributes from all of your Django models in a models.py. It grabs all of the help text and it grabs all of the doc strings for all of your objects, throws them into a nice HTML page that you can expose through all of your regular Django ways. You can add like protection for it and authentication, all that jazz. So it's kind of rad. And we started to build pages that looked like this. So here's another question. Does anybody know who Edmund Barton is? Great. Of those people who had their hands up, who remembers the big ad campaign around like 2001? They said, we're 100 years old and everybody knows who George Washington is, but nobody knows who Edmund Barton is. Yay. Yeah, it's like he's our first Prime Minister. And he's actually kind of cool. Like, it's really fascinating. So he was in Parliament for 3 years, in federal Parliament, and he was the first Prime Minister. And I started looking at going, you don't just get to be first Prime Minister. Like, there's a story there. So he started looking at managing state political services as well. And he had 20 years of state service in the New South Wales Senate, the New South Wales lower house prior to Federation, where he got a reputation with the Australian Bulletin magazine for showing up as the Speaker of the House drunk. Subsequently to be known in the press as Tosspot Toby. That's actually true. That's 100% true. You can look it up online. Tosspot Toby. And then after Federation, he was a Prime Minister. He didn't like it, and then joined the High Court. So really fascinating individual. And by bringing this rich data set together, by actually describing it in a very, very structured way, we could start exporting it and doing really cool things with it. Which brings us to our next slide is, timelines aren't enough. We actually get a lot of information requests around things. So we got a request just after we started the project around the political spill last year. I'm from Canberra, so I follow a lot of politics and have a lot of preconceptions about how much people actually follow these things. But there was the spill between Tony Abbott and Malcolm Turnbull, and one of the questions they asked was like, oh, this is like a really young, hip, funky cabinet. Like, it's the youngest cabinet in all of history. And they said, can we actually prove that? And a couple of people were like, oh no, we'd have to go through the books, it'd be hard, we're not sure. And me and a colleague of mine who worked on this said, give us a few minutes. So building, with Django, we did a whole bunch of database queries and said, find me all the people in all of the ministries, subtract their dates of birth from the start of their ministry, add them all up, sum them from the average of a ministry, and yes, the answer is yes. It was on average about 2 years younger than Tony Abbott's ministry, but by no means the youngest. And we had the proof for that. And we got the proof, we kind of turned that proof of concept into this Django data interrogator, which people will be less familiar with. Has anybody seen this one? No, that's okay. This one is still kind of cool, but it's kind of dorky as well. The Django data interrogator was a tool that I put together where it provides a front end so that you can interrogate your Django models through the front end, and it does a lot of, basically a lot of magic behind the, well, not a lot of magic behind the scenes, we don't like that term, but it does a lot of work behind the scenes to translate user strings into Django database query calls and hit the database once to get a whole bunch of information out. So it hits the database, it brings back tabular information and gives it to you. And then we went, okay, tables are cool, but we want to do stuff with them. Like, people don't get tables, they want to see graphs. And this is one of my favorite ones. This is also one of my points of pride around this is the graph of women in Parliament. Does anybody know who Australia's first female senator and member were? Who? And?
Member.
Enid Lyon. There you go. That's okay. Dorothy Tagney and Enid Lyon were the first female member and senator. That's a really nice political fact that comes up at trivia night, so remember that. If you don't remember anything else, remember that. Because it's kind of interesting. But what we didn't kind of realise, what nobody really picked up on, was this. So you can see Enid Lyon came in and then dropped out. And we had 2 female members and then no one for like 25 years. Like, they kind of had a couple of stop-starts, and then in the 80s, like, the idea of women in the lower house caught on, and they've stayed ever since. But since 1942, we've always had a female senator. This one right here is really interesting. So when you see a blip going down, that's where a whole bunch of people lost their seat and a whole bunch of people replaced them. So a drop going down is basically a big old change of government. Except for this one here, this little drop, those 2 blips, it had me doing my head in. I thought my code was broken for about a week. No, that was actually a lady from South Australia who decided she didn't like actually getting elected. She just liked being in Parliament. So very frequently she would resign her seat, take a casual vacancy and come back in, and was actually not elected for 9 years. She just kept getting reappointed by the governor. It's kind of cool. Like that's a thing that happened. You're going, who's I presume probably 90% of Australians, 90% of us are Australians. Yeah? Okay, cool. This is your history. This happened to our country. And our political history, as the last speaker said, we didn't have a revolution. We just had a whole bunch of guys in Parliament just kind of doing some stuff. This is the stuff that happened that made our country. It's true. And this is how it happened. So this is another one we did where we were doing big hits of the database and going, find me every event in history where somebody left the Senate. Because the Senate's much smaller, it's much easier to work with. So show me every person that left, every political party they were in, graph it over time, and show me the breakdown of history. Nobody's made this graph. I made this graph. And this is how it worked. So for those of you who don't know, the Liberal Party only actually cropped up in 1944. Before that, it was like a bunch of proto-liberal parties, but the Labor Party actually started quite early, and there's disputes as to whether or not they actually were pre-federation or not. But yeah, really long. So the green here, not the Greens, that's the Nationals. Nationals have been using the colour green in politics for much longer. This green is the Greens. Here you see all of your Lambies and your Lazaruses and all of your political rogues from the crossbench. And this one, somebody pointed out, this squashed elephant. Can you see it? This squashed elephant is the Australian Democrats. They kind of took a lot of seats in the Senate and then just became a squashed elephant, I guess. So yeah, this again, this is your story. This is what happened. This is what we did. This is how why we do it. And then lastly, one of the other ones was lots of dates in history. People love dates. They want to go, what happened today? Tell me about today. So this is what happened today. Not very much, not really a lot. So there was a by-election in 2000, a casual vacancy. So somebody's obviously left the Senate and been reappointed in 1958. Somebody resigned. There was a reshuffle in the Menzies cabinet today. Only one guy got dropped out. So there's probably a story there. And a bunch of people were born. So happy birthday to them. But this is what happened. So we can kind of go back and go, okay, show me all the dates in history. And so this is the part. This is the other good one. The mandatory architecture slide. I say mandatory because I'm just bad at these. Eventually, if I didn't, I have to try really hard and I still mess them up. This is what we actually built. So the handbook is predominantly built on Django and Python-based framework. So it's based on Haystack. Haystack is known. No? Okay, cool. Haystack's an amazing tool for search. Basically, it provides you a Django query set wrapper around a number of really well-supported search engines. So Elasticsearch, we used Whoosh because it's all Python-based. So it's a little bit slower, but it's just dead set easy to get set up. And then we had to connect it with all of the grey stuff is all the stuff that IT wanted us to kind of work with. So if you're working at an organisation where they say, ooh, Python, like Django, it's a little bit too hard, I'm on film to say we at Parliament House were able to get Django connected up through an IIS web service to LDAP with all of the security required that Parliament House has. So if you can find an organisation that has higher security standards than us, I'd like to know. So we got it set up like this. And this corner over here was actually not as hard as you might think, but still a little bit difficult, but we did it. So you can run Django pretty much anywhere. Why Django? It's kind of cool. I say to people, for me as a Python developer, one of the big challenges we had was we were constantly throwing away code. Like I said at the beginning, we didn't know what this would look like. We didn't have an idea of what political histories would look like. So the ability for us to throw away a database and in our development versions kind of spin up an SQLite database and just delete it and rebuild it and delete it and rebuild it and delete it and rebuild it was really good for us. We were agile in the colloquial sense of the term. We just kept building and not knowing what we were doing and keep. But we did it. We did something. But why Django? It's boring. That's what I said to IT. I said, it's not exciting. Like it's supported. It's like someone said, infrastructure. It's a framework. It's there. Like it's not something that's crazy and esoteric. You install it and it's done. And that was a big part. Like that's a big part of this talk. Is like Django's boring now, and that is that is an exciting idea. It's exciting in the sense that it means that you can get it running anywhere without hassle, without pushback, because it just is, and that's good. Now, up until this point, I've talked about our successes, and if you've laughed before, you're going to laugh even harder from now on in. We came up with this term that we called data banana skins. Data messes you up. Like these are the slip-ups that we had that prevented us from actually doing this well. The lessons that we learned around dealing with very, very incomplete data sets. So this is Francis McLean, born 1863. When? Don't know. There is no record of his birth date at all. Probably 1963. And I say probably because we're not even sure of that. So how did we do it? Well, there were a couple of ways that we could do it, and none of them really worked well. We could store it as a string, but that meant when we were doing all of our date manipulation on the database, we didn't have the ability to use actual date times. We could store it as a date, and then we'd have to have some way of recording the fact that certain dates were false. There are people born on the 1st of January, so that's not an option. So, okay, we then turned to, there was a library that we kind of pulled in and ripped apart and rebuilt for multi-field storage. So we would store a birth date and a birth confidence together so that on the back end, on the database, we'd have an approximation of the date, but when we displayed it, we could have granularity around the depth of that date that we'd show. So yeah, that was a big part of it. And the reason that we took that approach was because of, thank you, the necessity for working with dirty data, but also being able to do those date manipulations within the database. This one's a really good one. If you're not from Canberra, look up. Oh, you're going to love this. King O'Malley, not a king, not Irish, probably not even eligible to be elected to Parliament. King O'Malley was, like all of his political histories are so hilarious to look up. He was a very brash North American, probably from the US, who moved to the seat of Darwin in Tasmania when Darwin was in Tasmania, and became known for being a loud, brash American. And that was enough to get him elected. People in Canberra love him because he loved Canberra. He was one of the people who said, let's put the capital in Canberra. But he said he was from Quebec because that would mean he was eligible to actually be in Parliament. There's no way we could store that. Like you can't store an approximate country of birth. For, again, trivia purposes, King O'Malley is also the reason that the Labor Party is spelt O-R. So if you've ever wanted to know why the difference is there, King O'Malley believed that the American spelling would take over because at the time American spelling was quite big in the Commonwealth nations. And he said, let's get ahead of the times, let's be forward thinkers, spell the Labor Party O-R, and he was wrong. There's also a really nice pub called King O'Malley dedicated just to this guy's story. It's great. What is he? Oh, is that why? Oh, there you go. Did not drink. Did not drink, yet has a pub named after him. We had lots of just dirty data, like data that only cropped up once that we had to store. Lots of generic foreign keys that we needed to work with, but it worked. We were able to get it to work. This one was mostly for a library conference that I presented it at, looking at storing authorship details. Politicians do write a lot, and we record a lot of that because we're interested in what they did previously. But being able to manage where we don't know what facts are going to come up, being able to record that was necessary. So we had lots and lots of generic foreign keys to link people to parties, people and people, parties and electorates and all that jazz. And this is my favourite one. So if you can tweet this, I'm trying to get this to catch on. Jacobsons Law is if Excel can misinterpret your data, it will. And it will do it in the worst way. So Carolyn Jacobson was a parliamentarian in the 80s, not particularly of note. The reason that she cropped up for me is because her parliamentary identifier, which is public knowledge, it's on the APH website, is 0E4, which Excel decided really helpfully, occasionally, not even consistently, to say, I think that's 0 to the power of 4. No, Excel, bad. We also had issues of dates mostly. 1863 was the 5th of February. I think, yeah, 5th of February. I'm like, no, that's not right. And this is obviously a date. For crying out loud, Excel, I'm sorry, I'm speaking directly to the Excel development team now. This is obviously a date. Store it as a date, not a number. And these are the other ones that we came across. These are the assumptions we got wrong when trying to build a picture of political histories. Ministers need to be elected. Constitutionally wrong. Did not know. It's happened twice, both in Federation. Thank you. Both in Federation. But yeah, look it up. It's in the Constitution. You can be a minister for 3 months without being elected. If someone resigns, only one person will take their place. No. Sometimes someone will resign and take their own place. Someone will resign and no one will take their place. And sometimes someone will resign twice and someone will take only one of those. It was a huge mess. Like somebody resigning before they were meant to leave. Someone can never replace themselves. Again, patently false. If you win an election, you are elected. Again, this happened quite recently in Western Australia with the Senate counts. Somebody was formally elected. We started adding them in. We had all of their records, and then the election changed, and then we had to go back and remove them. But consequences of data meant there were issues there. And if you do everything right, you only have to do it once. I can tell you that's not true. We scrapped this many, many times, and one of the reasons why I say Django is awesome is because we scrapped everything multiple times. Timelines for this, as you've seen, we've already released 2 components of this as an open source piece of work. We've got it internal and we've been doing a lot of testing on it, and we're hoping to feed it out as an open source library by the end of the year, pending approvals and such. And these are the lessons. Data is messy, not just historical data, all data. Start again, Excel eats your data. Good data is hard to come by. This is the summary. We've got it up, and it's actually it's really cool in the sense of being able to demonstrate the power of open source software and the ability for data-driven applications to provide answers. And that's it. If you want to reach me, I'm there. You can tweet the Parliamentary Library. It's parlib or parlibrary. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam, for that fascinating insight into everything that's wrong with our political democracy, apparently. Do we have any questions? If you do, if we do, so...
Thanks for the great talk. You mentioned at the end that you're planning on open sourcing this project. Do you have an idea how much the Australian governmental structure or the constraints you build on top of that are usable by other governments that are not at all related to Australia or the Commonwealth?
Yeah, absolutely. So we looked, there's a Django re-implementation of Open Popolo that wasn't quite fit for us. So we rebuilt a lot of that in the sense that when you look at political systems around the world, they often will have a chamber of some description. They'll have members of a chamber. They will have positions within those chambers. So we designed it in a very, very generic way with the intent that we built a generic framework for any political system to be built on top of, and then built specifications for ours specifically on top of that. So we've already spoken with a lot of the states which have their own idiosyncrasies as well to manage that kind of information. So yeah, hopefully there'll be some uptake in other, at least similar bicameral areas.
Great, thanks.
Not a problem.
Thank you very much. You're using Microsoft SQL in obviously a Windows environment, and all of the Django documentation in the Django community seems to repeat the mantra of just use Postgres, and a lot of people are using Linux. Have you found any fundamental limitations of Django because of the environment that you're running in?
There was one I hit. It was text concatenation behind the scenes. And I think that was the only thing that Microsoft's SQL didn't have. But no, we were able to get it up and running with very little difficulty. I can understand, when I'm looking at server administration for my own purposes, Linux is much easier, it's much more supported. But ICT said you can have it as Django on Windows, or we're going to have to do a lot of work to kind of potentially rebuild it. So we kind of went, okay, let's do Windows, let's see how it works. And it just worked. there were really no difficulties at all. It's boring, is the punchline.
I'm just wondering about the dates that you have in incomplete dates. Did you choose to store when you only know the year as the 1st of January?
On the database, no. So we gave people the ability to store as much of the date they knew. So there are cases where we knew that it was the first week of June, for example. So we could say 6th and give an accuracy of that down to the month. So when we were doing calculations, we'd be able to get a rough approximation. But on the database, we stored an actual date.
But you rounded down to the lowest, like the 1st of the month or the 1st of the year.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the middle would be more for?
We never really got into that much depth. And again, because you're talking about like unknowns, we just would take whatever we could work with. It very much depended on the purpose for what we were using the date for. So sometimes, like when it was for database calculations, it was the date as it was stored directly. When it was for display purposes, we would truncate it in different ways. When it was for visualization, we'd put it in different ways as well. So for anything that was a start date of an event, it would be at the beginning of the session. So beginning of the year. If it was an end date, we'd just put it at the end of the year to kind of get as much coverage for visualization purposes. And for events, we'd smack it straight in the middle. So like dates vary broadly in how you can use them when you don't know what they are.
Yep.
So.
Yep.
You have a question? Yeah.
Fascinating, thank you. A question, how do you convert the information from the database to paper? You said you're going to publish the...
Yep. A lot of that, so we haven't been looking at that for the first release, but we go through a publishing house for the production of the print handbook, and that's done through XML docbook kind of format. So we'd just be using Django templating and exporting, like a bulk export of content from the database in some paperish form for consumption by the publishers.
What, HTML or PDF?
For the publishers, it's a form of docbook. Like it was a proprietary form of docbook that we'd have to be looking at working with. But because it's XML, we're able to produce it using the Django templating framework.
Thank you.
No problem.
Hey, great talk. I was wondering that since you were like generating reports and whatever from data ranging back from 100 years ago, was there anything special you had to do in terms of optimizing queries, or did you just struggle with running it all day long or something?
The queries were a lot of the time cached. We'd cache like dates because, you know, when somebody was elected 100 years ago hasn't changed. We were able to do a lot of caching for a lot of the queries and a lot of the visualizations. The data set, as long as the data set is actually not very big. We're only talking about, I think it's 1,600 discrete individuals with, you know, a bunch of events around it. So it's not a big data set. So we're actually able to kind of hit it really inoptimally, unfortunately, but still get really good stuff coming out.
As a fellow dev that's forced to use Microsoft SQL, what are you using to connect, and how much do you have to go outside the ORM to get what you need to do?
We were using Django MSSQL. It's a library, it's on pip, it's really easily available. It was like just install and done. And we didn't have any problems with the ORM that I can think of off the top of my head. Certainly nothing that bit us hard enough to say this is bad.
And you're 2.7?
For SQL Server?
No, for
no, yes.
Yeah, I thought so.
So.
Okay, one last question just to round out here. Connecting this talk to Donna's originally, the Donna extolled the virtues of being involved in government as a promotion platform for Drupal. I had absolutely no idea that we were being used inside the Parliamentary Library. So is there any scope for using this as a, hey, look, government people, we can do cool things, or are your doors shut in terms of you can't really promote beyond mentioning it, things like this?
Oh, no, like absolutely, like it's recorded, I'm here, I'm talking about it. I'd be very glad if people were to talk about this project. Like this, the project itself, we're intending to go public with a lot of this documentation, with a lot of this information. We've had discussions, very public discussions with other cultural institutions in Canberra, so the National Library, the Museum of Australian Democracy, which is really great, guys should go. There's a lot of exciting stuff in Canberra. Don't laugh at that one. Come on. There is a lot of really cool stuff in Canberra. No, so we've been talking with a lot of people about this, so it's not a secret. And the intent is that this is public information. Like, it's not a secret when Tony Abbott, for example, was born. Like, it's not a secret where he was born. It's not a secret what he's been doing in politics for quite a long time. These are all public pieces of knowledge that are recorded and printed, and you can go to your local library and you can get it. So yeah, like, please talk about this. Please talk about this. As much as you guys want. And yeah, we're at the Parliamentary Library. We're doing awesome, cool stuff.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sam.
Thanks.